Hello and welcome back to Missing 411 Examined, where we take a closer look at the cases presented in Missing 411 Eastern United States to determine if they line up with reality or not. This will be my last video examining the cases in this book, as we will finish off with Vermont and New Jersey. Up first is Alfred Bishop. Alfred, of unknown age, went missing on November 3, 1926, from Reading, Vermont. Alfred and his friend Morris were out hunting near Reading and they split up. When Alfred did not return to the cars, Morris searched the area, then he went to go and get help. After about 24 hours, searchers found Alfred's body beside an abandoned road near a summer camp. There was evidence of a struggle, with beaten down snow, and Alfred's rifle, coat, and gloves strewn in different directions. There were no bloodstains, however, and Alfred's body had no wounds. An autopsy found no signs of violence. Alfred was 28 years old. Morris was his brother-in-law, not his friend, although I suppose those two are not mutually exclusive. And while the autopsy did not find signs of violence, they did, however, find the cause of death, which was heart failure. Alice Lorraine Baker. Alice, who was 20 months old at the time, went missing on August 16, 1937, from Bald Mountain, Vermont. Alice and her family were on a summer vacation at a cabin north of Bennington, Vermont. Alice's mother left her alone in the cabin for about 10 minutes while she went to a neighbor's house. When her mother returned, Alice was gone. Authorities felt that Alice had been kidnapped from the cabin. The temperature got so cold outside that the sheriff stated that there was no way Alice could have survived outside. Searchers found Alice on the 20th of August near a logging road underneath a spruce tree. She was alive, but naked and sitting on top of her sunsuit. Doctors stated that she'd be up and playing in just a few days. There were no statements as to her state of dehydration or hunger. Well, if the sheriff felt like there was a kidnapping, he had a funny way of showing it. The sheriff made this statement, quote, "After checking all the possibilities, we are positive that the child can't have been taken out of this locality," close quote. He went on to talk about searching the woods after that. Further, an article from the Bennington Evening Banner gave this statement, quote, "Through the search, Inspector Griggs and Sheriff Peck, who were in charge, Griffith and the others, were convinced that the missing child was within the searching distance and had not been kidnapped or fallen victim to foul play." Close quote. The weather was actually noted to be rather mild, not especially cold. In addition to what was in Missing 411, doctors also stated that her feet were badly swollen, and her body was scratched all over from brambles. While it wasn't directly stated what she ate or drank, it was heavily inferred. One article stated that she had stains around her mouth from blackberries. Carl Herrick. Carl, who was 37 years old at the time, went missing on November 23, 1943, from West Townshend, Vermont. West Townshend is approximately 10 miles northeast of Bennington. Carl was hunting with his cousin Henry when they got separated at some point. Henry notified law enforcement almost immediately. Snow fell the first night that Carl was missing. On the third day, Henry found Carl's body lying in the snow. His face was black with minor scratches on the hands and arms. There were bear tracks in the area, and Carl's rifle was leaning up against a tree 70 feet away from his body. One expended round was lying near the rifle. The coroner listed the cause of death as from a bear. It hit him on the head, then squeezed him, puncturing a lung. Frankly, I'm not sure why this case is included in the book at all. It is not unsolved, nor is it mysterious. According to Google Maps, which Missing 411 has referenced as a source before, the actual distance is about 26 miles. Carl went alone on purpose to his hunting spot. It was not Henry who notified law enforcement, it was his wife, and it was the next day when he did not return home. It was another cousin, Horace Hewitt, not Henry, who found him. And finally, as you may have guessed, the events are reconstructed as follows. Carl was hunting a deer when he saw a bear. He took the shot, and he believed that he had killed it. He approached the bear, placing his gun against a tree, when the bear suddenly attacked him, scratching his face and arms before smothering him and crushing his chest. His story is actually used in subsequent articles as a cautionary tale to other hunters who may leave their gun out of reach and let their guard down to wild animals. Middie Rivers. Middie, who was 75 years old at the time, went missing on November 12, 1945, from Glastonbury Mountain, Vermont. Middie was a game guide and was leading a group of 4 hunters down a mountain. He got ahead of them, but when the hunters arrived at their vehicles, he was not there. The only evidence found of Middie was a single bullet by a creek, which was reasoned as having fallen out of his pocket when he bent down for a drink. Paulides reasons that another explanation for the bullet would be that Middie saw a threat. He retrieved the bullet to load his weapon, but was overpowered. Most articles say that Middie was 74, but 75 is reported as well. As for the hunters he was with, from what I can tell, it was possibly his brother-in-law. But more importantly, he didn't just disappear from in front of them. He had set off on his own, purposefully, but did not return. Either way, the only account that I saw that matches Missing 411's version is an article from October of 2000, which I remind you is 55 years later and does not match the initial accounts. I couldn't find an article that noted an unspent bullet being found, besides an article in 2018, which noted that the bullet may not have even been from Middie anyway. It's not really a possibility that Middie was overpowered by a predator where the bullet was found. Signs of a struggle would have been present, and if a predator had overpowered him at that point, his belongings or body would have been found nearby, unless this animal also cleaned up the scene afterwards. Paula Jean Welden. Paula, who was 18 years old at the time, went missing on December 1st, 1946, from Glastonbury Mountain, Vermont, the same as the last case. Paula told her roommate that she was going for a hike. A motorist picked up Paula and dropped her off at the base of Long Trail, a hiking path at the base of the mountain. The next day, Paula's roommate reported her missing. Many false leads turned up during this time, but none went anywhere. Police were able to confirm that the motorist did drop off Paula and that she was later seen on the hiking trail around 4 p.m. He was concerned because it was going to get dark at 5 p.m. The search was terminated after just 2 weeks, then picked up again in May of the following year. She was never found. There was a lack of coordination in the searching, and the Vermont State Police did not exist at this time. As far as I can tell, all the facts presented are correct as far as this case goes. This is one of the most famous missing person cases in Vermont. Paul Jepson Jr. Paul, who was 8 years old at the time, went missing on October 12, 1950, from Bennington City Dump, Vermont. Paul was left alone in the front seat of his mother's truck while she went to tend to some pigs. When she noticed that Paul was missing, she called her husband, who then called the sheriff. The father noted that Paul had a fascination with the forest. Bloodhounds tracked Paul's scent down a road onto another road, but then stopped. Nearby homes were searched. The sheriff stated that he had discarded any theory that Paul had met with foul play. He was never found. Paul had a little bit more than a fascination with the forest. His parents noted that he had run away many times before. As for the sheriff discarding theories, he clearly did not discard any theory unduly, as he had interrogated Paul's parents. Frida Langer. Frida, who was 53 years old at the time, went missing on October 28, 1950, from Somerset, Vermont. Frida, her husband, and her cousin went to a cabin that they owned. The morning of the 28th, Frida's husband had a sore knee and told her and her cousin to go hunting without him. Frida tripped and fell into a creek and opted to return to the cabin to change into some dry clothes. When she was last seen, she was just 150 yards from the cabin. About an hour later, her cousin returned and found that Frida had not made it back to the cabin. They searched for her and called for law enforcement the next day. The subsequent search went on for a week, but was suspended after they didn't find anything. In May of the next year, Frida's body was found 3 miles from her cabin, half submerged in the reeds of a swamp. This area was thoroughly searched already. The coroner stated that she had died of accidental drowning. There was no inquest into her death. Paulides declares that there's no way that she had gotten lost, and something very bad had happened to her. He caps it with this statement: Quote, "If a predator wanted to take a person into an area where they would not be seen, and a person wouldn't walk up on them, a swamp with high reeds would be ideal." Close quote. Let's look at some missing context. Frida was recovering from brain cancer. There were some fears that falling into the creek and hitting her head had brought back some symptoms and had caused her to get lost or pass out in a dangerous place. There was indeed an inquest into her death. It was launched by the Attorney General. It actually interrupted the funeral process. Afterwards, however, the Attorney General was satisfied and agreed that the cause of death was accidental drowning. I think it's pretty obvious that there is indeed a way that she got lost. Missing 411 is absolutely filled with these declarations. There's no way this happened. This thing doesn't make any sense. Lastly, according to Missing 411, if I'm reading this correctly, this is the scenario put forward. A predator was able to grab Frida off the trail without leaving any marks or allowing her to scream. It then hauled her through the woods back to a swamp 3 miles away without encountering any more suitable locations to kill her, and without even hurting her or leaving marks, and not allowing her to scream the entire way. It then drowned her instead of killing her with fangs, claws, or hands in such a way that there were no signs of violence on the body. And all of this is directly opposed to the evidence of the autopsy findings, the inquest, and the opinions of professionals who actually saw the body. The chapter summary for Vermont has a couple of claims in it that I have issue with. First is the claim that the only disappearances in the wild in Vermont occurred from 1926 to 1950. This is false. A quick news search brought up several hikers that were lost from 1950 to 2011. The next claim is that since Paul Jepson and Frida Langer disappeared within 18 days of each other and were close geographically, they must be related. Gladys calls this common sense, as they also disappeared in rural settings. I won't subject you to another lengthy discussion about how incredibly dissimilar these two disappearances are, but feel free to look into that angle if you so choose. Let's carry on to New Jersey. Unknown first name, Barofsky. Barofsky, who was 6 years old at the time, went missing on July 1st, 1892, from Bridgeton, New Jersey. Gladys notes that newspapers at this time normally do not mention the first name of children who go missing, but that child was a boy. The Barofsky boy went missing 3 miles east of Bridgeton from a rural community named Carmel. Teams of searchers combed the nearby swamps for 4 days. There were heavy thunderstorms during this time. On the 4th day of searching, a hunter found Barofsky over a mile from where he went missing, badly injured and barely alive. He was found hanging over a bush, surrounded by water. All the bushes within the child's reach were gnawed and eaten. Bad gashes covered the child. Doctors didn't think that he would survive. There were no follow-up articles as to the child's condition. His first name was Raphael, although there's some discrepancy among what his last name is or how to spell it. I agree that most articles fail to mention his name, but it's out there in several of them. Additionally, his father's name was Lazarus. To clarify how he was found, he was observed to have climbed into the bush after taking a drink of water. He definitely put himself in that bush. As for an update on his condition, Raphael was recovering well as of the 8th of July, although there was still some concern that pneumonia would set in. Later, the hunter who found him was awarded with a medal, which I think gives a bit of credence to the idea that Raphael survived. George William Billy Dansey. Billy, who was 30 months old at the time, went missing on October 8, 1919, from Hamilton, New Jersey. Billy's family was new to the area, having arrived in July of that year. Billy went outside to play unsupervised with his fox terrier, Jack. When his mother went out to check on him after a short time, both Billy and Jack were gone. The police were called and a search began. Late on the first day, Jack returned without Billy. This next part is so odd, I want to quote it directly. Quote, "The family took the dog back towards the dahlia field and swamp and asked, 'Where is Billy?' The dog looked down and refused to move, close quote. I believe the word for that is personification. It rained very hard, off and on for several days. One of Billy's toys was found in a remote area, and it was smashed. Additionally, there was an abandoned home nearby that was found to be recently slept in. Law enforcement believed that he had been kidnapped. A nearby farmer was arrested for Billy's murder, but was later released. 6 weeks after Billy disappeared, a hunter found Billy deep in a swamp, deceased. Police stated that he had been abducted and dumped there, since they didn't believe that he had gotten there on his own. Portions of Billy's clothes were hung on nearby bushes. Billy was naked except for his shirt. Most of his flesh was eaten away, but his bones were not broken. An inquest determined that the family knew that Billy could not undress himself, and that he could not have made it to the location where he was found on his own. I'd like to reiterate that most toddlers of 2.5 can indeed remove their own clothing, whether parents know that or not. Most papers tend to report his age as 2.5, because that's what 30 months comes out to. However, Billy was actually 2 years and 10 months old, or 34 months. All the more strange that his age would be identified as 30 months rather than the usual 2 or 3 rounding present in other cases. I don't see how personifying a dog and its reaction could possibly indicate anything. If you angrily demand of a dog any question, it's likely to look down in shame. Not because it knows what you're saying, but because it knows that it's in trouble. Next, I'd like to add some context to the reason behind why so many people thought that Billy was kidnapped. An anonymous letter admitted to kidnapping him because he was mistaken for someone who lived next door. There was also an ex-suitor of the mother who had threatened her. I don't know about a farmer being arrested, but a florist was. He and his housekeeper were held for about a year before finally being released when a grand jury refused to indict them, and the location where he was found was reported between 2 and 4 miles away. The police were so certain that Billy had been kidnapped and dumped there, they held 2 people in jail for a year without sufficient evidence. When they were released, the DA said that he was satisfied that the case was closed. This tells me one of 2 things. Either the district attorney was convinced that Charles White and Edith Jones, the 2 people arrested, were responsible and they got away with it, or the district attorney concluded that Billy had died of exposure and no foul play was involved. Billy's parents eventually left the area, giving this last quote in the Courier Post. Quote, "If the people of New Jersey can allow the blood of our innocent child, murderously slain, to dry up in its sands and be forgotten, we bear no malice, but leave forever the state where we had made our home." Close quote. Next is the final case in the book, Richard Peterson. Richard, who was 6 years old at the time, went missing on November 5th, 1982, from Delmont, New Jersey. Richard and his brother Brian were visiting their grandparents in a rural area of Delmont. They were playing outside together when their grandmother went to check on them, and they were both gone. After an hour and a half of searchers combing the area, Brian was found half of a mile away in the wilderness. Articles made no mention of the condition of Brian. The search expanded from that point, but could not find Richard. It was very cold in that area during this time. 2 days after they went missing, a hunter found Richard, alive but naked, laying on the ground. He was in a daze, had scratches all over his body, and was suffering from hypothermia. This case is mostly correct. Brian was 4 years old at the time, if you were curious, and he was indeed found just about 2 hours after he went missing, which probably is why his condition wasn't reported on. While I would dispute opinions expressed as facts at the end of the chapter, such as Richard would not have removed his clothes due to the weather, and I would point out that it's emphatically stated that they wandered off while playing, and the shoes and trousers were lost in the woods, well, Missing 411 needs to end on a win, so I'll mark this case as correct. So here we are at the end. I'll have one more video on Missing 411 Eastern United States, where I give my final thoughts and opinions. If you're not interested in my personal views next time, but want to know the verdict, here it is. Overall, across the 175 cases that we have covered from the book, 34 were found to be accurately reported and lined up with reality. In percentage form, that's about 19.4%. We'll round it up and say 20. Thank you for joining me on this journey. I look forward to seeing you next time if you choose to indulge me. Otherwise, we'll begin looking at the next Missing 411 book, Western United States. Until then, take care.